Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, welcome to lecture number 18. In this lecture, we will talk about the superspecies. For the outlines, we will talk about the superspecies and we will discuss it with examples. Lecture outcomes. So after watching and listening to this lecture, student will know about the concept of superspecies and taxonomy. What is superspecies? Keep in mind that superspecies is not a formally accepted taxonomic category. It's not a nomenclature. Superspecies represent a group of related and totally allopatric and monophyletic species. Now, three characteristics you should keep in mind. Superspecies represent, number one, group of related. Now, as a group of related species mean those individuals which are related to the same group. But the second point is that they are totally allopatric. Though they belong to the same species, but they are totally allopatric, mean they are completely geographically isolated. They have no access to each other. And the third thing is, which is again very important, that they are monophyletic species. Mean the superspecies, they all will belong to the same ancestor. They are descendant, they came from the same ancestor, from the same line. But they are introduced into different geographies and they are now isolated from each other geographically. So allopatric populations, now because of their allopatry, when they become geographically isolated, these populations with the passage of time slowly and gradually changes accumulate in them, and time comes that these populations are so distinct from each other that some scientists they have a little doubt about their having reached to species level. Mean some scientists believe that now they are another species, they have reached to the species level, but certain scientists they do not believe, they still believe that they are not complete species, they are like super species. So Kleinschmidt in 1926 used the term formencaries for these geographic series. Now these are geographic series because such species belong to a monophyletic, a single lineage, they are closely related, but the thing is they are geographically isolated, they are distributed into different geographies. So those different geographies make a series, and this Kleinschmidt in 1926 named those series formencaries. And another scientist, Resch, in 1929 proposed a German word, a tencaries, for these allopatric species. But later on, Mayer in 1931 introduced a formal term that is known as superspecies for the sake of convenience. So the formencaries and artencaries, those words or terminologies were then discarded, and superspecies is still in use. Superspecies can be defined as the first thing is it's a monophyletic group and closely related, mean they descended from the same lineage, from the same ancestors, and they are largely or entirely allopatric. Largely or entirely allopatric mean they are completely almost allopatric. They are living in very different geographic regions. They are geographically isolated from each other. Though they belong to the same parents, but they are entirely allopatric. Allopatric mean they are living in different geographies, and they are too distinct to be included in single species. The first thing is they are monophyletic group, the second is entirely allopatric, the third is they are too much different, and because of that you cannot include them into a single species because of the too much difference or variation in them. Or and the last thing that is very important, they demonstrate their reproductive isolation in a zone of contact. For example, it means that if two population from these allopatric or from these superspecies, if you bring them close together, or if there is a zone of contact, a place where the boundaries of these population interact with each other. So when they interact with each other, they will show reproductive isolation, mean they will not interbreed with each other, because with the passage of time they become so much vary, and their genes are now vary from each other, different from each other, and now they do not recognize each other as potential mates, and they will show reproductive isolation. They will not interbreed with each other, which is the very important thing in the recognition of the species. So we recognize the species by its reproduction. They reproduce with each other, but these do not reproduce with each other. So they are the first thing is they are monophyletic, closely related. Second, they are entirely allopatric. Third, they are totally distinct, and they are totally different. You cannot include them in a single species. And the fourth thing is that they will show reproductive isolation if you bring them into a close contact. So superspecies are not given nomenclature recognition in zoology, but these are very important. They are used like for the appropriate headings and symbols and monographs and catalogs. So when we are collecting specimen, we are cataloging specimen in a museum. When we draw monographs, so we use headings and symbols for superspecies. Simpson in 1961 defined the superspecies as a group of population that have passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding. Mean those populations which are passed beyond the potential interbreeding, mean they changes, a number of changes are accumulated in them, and now they cannot interbreed with each other, so they passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding. We define species as potentially interbreeding population, but these superspecies, they have passed through evolution, they have passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding. Now they cannot interbreed with each other, and they have acquired a separate evolutionary role. But we cannot accept them as a whole species or a new species, because still they have some characteristics, remaining characteristics of the same species. That's why we do not consider them as a full species. We will consider them as a full species after acquiring all the requirements which is required for a full species. Now, it is presumed that they are still near the critical point of speciation. So, why we do not consider them as a full species? Because scientists believe that still they are near at the critical point of speciation. So, we do not consider them full species. And the component species, now, in a superspecies population, the component species is considered as semi-species. We call them semi-species because we also consider them as a borderline species, that they are at the borderline. Anytime they may become a full species. And American in 1967 introduced the term allospecies for the component species of the superspecies. So you can say like semi-species, but you can also say that the component species is also known as allospecies. So the allospecies, the term allospecies was introduced by American in 1967, but semi-species is also used for the component species of the superspecies. But there are many workers who recognize two types of superspecies, like geographical superspecies and chronological superspecies. So this is the example of a parrot population. These are all descended. If you look to these parrots, they are morphologically, they are very different from each other, and all of them, they are geographically isolated from each other. So the Phycelips robustus, or the Mary, or the Rupelli, these all, they are isolated from each other geographically, but they belong to the same phylogeny. They are from the same descendant, from the same parents. So that's why we consider them as one species because all of them, they belong to the same line, from they descended from the same parents. But then the second point comes that they are totally allopatric. They are totally geographically isolated from each other. The third thing is they are so distinct from each other. Now, you can see the difference in all of them. You cannot consider them all of them as a single species or a single population. And the fourth is now they will show like reproductive isolation if you bring them together to each other. So that this red-fronted parrot, yellow-fronted parrot, brown-necked parrot, or brown parrot, this Ropali parrot, and brown-headed parrot, name parrot, and Senegal parrot, and red-billed parrot. So all these are superspecies. Another very good example of a superspecies is from the black-throated green warblers. So scientists considered these black-throated green warblers as parents or the main population for these four population like Townsend warblers, hermit warblers, golden-cheeked warblers, black-throated gray warblers. So all these four population belong to this parent black-throated green warblers. So scientists believe that they descended from these common ancestors. Now, these species they expanded from its southeastern USA deciduous forest territory and to the coniferous forest when the recent glaciation advances occurred, which isolated their populations, and then their generations, their population spread slowly and gradually to the west and northern through lower northern North America, and then these population they become too much divergent, and they become now the super species. So these species also like is again an example of super species. These are the black-throated green warblers, the black-throated gray warblers. So it's a small warbler of the American West and found in pine and mixed oak pine forests west of the Rocky Mountains. These are the golden-cheeked warblers and the hermit warblers, and this is the Townsend warblers. So these are super species. Then there's a mallard duck superspecies group. So these ducks, these are the distributed like to the right of this map, and the mallard duck superspecies group. This is an example of the superspecies. Thank you so much for listening. If you guys have any question, please ask.